Welcome everybody to the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group. This is the bi-weekly sync. It is June 18th. It is a midsummer, which is apparently being only celebrated in Finland and in Sweden. So in Finland, that's the biggest family celebration, because typically this time of the year, we'll have 2 days of summer and the other one will rain anyway. But anyway, that's more than enough from Finland and a stupid joke. Anyway, so today we'll have a lot of stuff to go through. So we'll have actually a quick recap on where we are with SharePoint Framework. Nothing really dramatically new on that one. I'm just going to give some updates on the schedule. Then we'll have a massive recap on 5 different open source projects. We'll run them through relatively fast. Let's see if the owners are on the call, depending on their availability. Then we have, I think Hugo is on the call to do a quick recap on the new community samples, and then 3 demos. So I'm trying to be so fast on the intro that we are arriving to the demos on quarter past. So if you're not interested in anything else, you can have a coffee break for 15 minutes, and a quarter past will be in the demo section, and Alex is going to start, and then Siddharth, and then Paul Saffelin is going to do some cool stuff as well. But let's actually get moving on to classic stuff. So quick recap on the opportunities. Just please reach out if you're interested on doing any of the demos or contributing. Doing demos on the calls. And we absolutely welcome them. Right now, we're already booking August. So please be early if you're interested on booking things. So that means that it will not be the next call where you can be actually doing the demo, but people seem to like, and I personally absolutely love the community contributions and community demos. So that is a great way of learning how to do stuff in Microsoft 365 platform. You can also contribute in GitHub. We'll go through the projects in a second, and which are related on the client-side dev. And the most important thing, provide feedback. Super important. And also positive feedback is welcome. I think I mentioned this last time or whenever it was. There was a moment where somebody actually opened up an issue. I think it was in PnP JS library, and where they basically said, "Yeah, I just wanted to open up an issue and say, awesome job." And I'm just letting you know that that's actually circled around against with all of the people who actually are working behind the scenes on things, because it is so rare that people actually provide openly positive feedback. Negative feedback and people calling out other people, yeah, that happens all the time, because this is apparently the time of the internet. But let's try to learn to be positive. Let's try to get to the positives and move forward from there. Now, a quick recap on our assets. Not going to spend too much time on this. The number one URL to actually remember is the AKMS M365 PnP, which is basically the location where you can find all of the different assets and locations and projects and links and blah, blah. So that's the welcome page of the Microsoft 365 patterns and practices, where this initiative and this call is also part of. Now, we also have, if you're interested on contributing, but you're not super familiar and you're scared, we can help you, and that's the beauty of the community. So we have this open Sharing is Caring initiative, which is basically helping, well, Sharing is Caring is a slogan, but then this initiative is called Sharing is Caring, where we actually help first-time contributors and community docs contributors on learning how to use GitHub and contribute on the GitHub, or contribute on the docs.microsoft.com or in the GitHub in general. So please, if you don't feel comfortable enough, go to the AKMS Sharing is Caring URL and sign up for these trainings. They are really good, and we're hearing a lot of great feedback, how awesome and helpful these sessions are for the people who are joining on them. So please go there and be active. Quick recap on the SharePoint Framework. We are closing into the SharePoint Framework 1.11 release. So that's going to happen in July. Right now is the plan, roughly in mid-July. I'm actually going to have a few weeks off starting from a certain time in July, so I need to get it out before that. So otherwise, my wife will not be happy. So that's right now the driving factor. So obviously, if there's technical issues and we need to delay the release, then we'll delay the release and somebody else will take that. But anyway, just letting you know, mid-July or right after mid-July is right now the target. It will basically also be enabling us to go to the app source, so you can actually have SharePoint Framework solutions. So you can already start thinking, do you have something what you would like to put on the store, and then have your licensing structures and all of those implemented as an option. as well. There will be Teams integration improvements, so task modules and metadata updates for the manifests for the auto generation, nothing too dramatic, but again, enabling more ISV scenarios. There's additional, in general, we're looking into Teams as the focus area, definitely, but also we're not forgetting the SharePoint and portals, not at all. So all of that is definitely a focus area as well. But as a rule of thumb, Teams is the target for Microsoft right now. Now, quick recap on the BMP JS client-side libraries. I'm just double checking. Julie, are you in the call? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, you're not. So the next release will be 2.07, which is happening in July 10th. 2.06 happened already. That actually already had taxonomy APIs and updates and docs updates. And it's great to see the interest on this one. I was just checking this. It has more than 400 hearts and likes in the GitHub, so, and it's used super widely. The usage is growing really much. Patrick is still on a family leave, parental leave, basically, and he's coming back on the latter part of July, actually on the exact day when I'm starting my vacation, which is kind of funny by an accident, but he'll be back in July. Until then, Julie and Andrew and the other team is handling the BMP JS. Now, quickly on the Office 365 CLI, 2.11 is the latest one, which is the beta version. Support for creating Microsoft Teams using templates, improved upgrading of the SPFx projects. So by the way, just to recap, we know that we're repeating this in every single thing, every single session, but if you have any existing SharePoint Framework solutions, use the Office 365 CLI to upgrade to the latest version. Definitely the easiest way to do that. It is also looking into get renamed as a Microsoft 365 or M365 in the future. That naming discussion is still ongoing together with our marketing. Now, SPFx reusable components, again, updates here as well, new controls in 1.19. One of the things what I wanted to call out here is, for example, the property pane file picker, which is the lower right-hand picture, which actually looks like the out-of-the-box one. But it is actually a third-party, a custom one, which has been contributed by the community. So thank you for these contributions as well. And then we have the BMP SPFx Generator. In here, we just had a release today with a absolutely great add-on where we now support Angular 9. With BMP SPFx Generator. So if you are not in React and you prefer to do your development using Angular, that is now an option for you using the BMP SPFx Generator. Behind the scenes, this generator is using the out-of-the-box one, so you are not actually using any rogue functionality, so to say. This generator decorates the out-of-the-box one and adds capabilities like the Angular support on it. So that's pretty cool as well. And then a quick recap on the BMP Modern Search. There's a new version coming up in July 2020. Not a massive updates until then. Again, BMP Search is the location. So this is the one which is enabling you to build modern SharePoint search centers until the first party experience is available. Again, new version planned to get out in July. Now, BMP SPFx Examples. I know, Hugo, you're probably on the call.
I am. Thank you.
Yeah. So I heard you breathing. I can recognize you breathing. So just kidding.
It's French Canadian breathing. So we have the SPFx sample repositories. There are two of them. One is the SPFx extensions, and one is the SPFx web parts. They are community contributed samples. And they can represent any kind of scenarios, including some very basic concepts to pretty much entire solutions that you can use. So we have new samples. One is a full-on image editor from Raul Mendes. It allows you to actually edit images directly within the library. It's fantastic. We also have updates to my followed site application customizers by Raul, who updated it to SPFx 1.10. And I believe Raul was one of our Sharing is Caring graduates. We also have a new web part from Harsha Vardini, the React web part details. And what it does, it actually allows you to look at all the web parts on a page, get information about those web parts, and interact with them. So this is a great concept that you can use in your own web parts. Harsha is also a Sharing is Caring graduate, so we're proud to see her work here. Joao also updated his React tree organization web part, he's added some sample exception handler. And we have another web part from Siddharth, who I believe will be demoing it today. And if he didn't know that, now he knows. So it's to add.
I think he knows. I think he knows.
Yeah. Just trying to surprise him. Where we can add the JavaScript and CSS references on modern pages. We also have the adaptive card host, which I created a version of it. Today you'll actually see a React hooks version of it by Paul Schaeffelin. But what we've done here is in May, the adaptive cards schema for adaptive card templating was changed, and it broke all our web parts, so we had to update them. We have also an update to the React calendar. I actually used the Office 365 CLI project upgrade using Code Tours. If you haven't tested that, try it. We have the modern calendar by Nandeep, and this was a web part sample from originally by Jeremy Coleman, but Nandeep updated it for us. And finally, we have two more, the React Carousel web part by Raul again, and the React App Insights dashboard by Sudarshan, who added support for communication pages. I encourage you to go to aka.ms SPFx extensions and aka.ms/SPFx web parts, and we're always looking for samples. If you have anything to contribute, we love to see your sample. That's it for me. Vesa, back to you.
Thank you, Hugo. Thank you, Hugo. Thank you, everybody, for contributing. This is really, really cool stuff, and it's great to see more and more contributions on this area. So really, really, really great stuff. And by the way, if you are interested by contributing, and then whenever you're contributing, then Hugo or somebody else is always reaching out and asking, hey, do you want to do a live demo of this thing? So if you're interested on getting exposure through this community calls as well, so we can get you scheduled. And good example of those people are these three persons who volunteered based on their contributions, which we'll see today. And we are amazingly on the schedule as well. So I was speaking so fast on the start. I need to start doing that even more in the future. Maybe not. Now, Alex, I saw that you're already a presenter, which is good, and we can actually start moving to your screen.
And you should see the personal app settings.
And yes, we can. Alex, so thank you for this one. Take it away.
Okay, so this demo is about web part that is hosted in Microsoft Teams as a personal app. And probably, as you know, the personal apps or personal tabs in Teams, they don't have settings. So for SharePoint Framework developers, it means that this .properties object is never populated. It's always undefined. But in real scenarios, we probably need to store settings somewhere and to customize different behaviors of our web part based on different users. And there are multiple different approaches that we can use here. One of the approaches, for example, described by Robert Scouten, sorry if I pronounced the last name correctly, this approach is about using OneDrive documents, and in document you can store all the configurations for the web parts. Another option is Microsoft Graph custom properties for users. And the approach that I want to show you today is about OneDrive as well, but it's about creating a custom list in OneDrive and storing the information in there. So first of all, here you see the web part itself. It has custom panel where you can do the same configuration of the properties like in property pane. When you click save, it should update, hopefully. No, it's not. Yes, it's updated. And if I refresh, the properties should be saved, so you will see the same configuration. So everything works. Now I want to show you the OneDrive list. So here I'm on my OneDrive. It means that because personal apps are about users, so each user has unique configurations. That's why we can use users OneDrive to save their unique settings. So I have this WP properties list on my OneDrive. And I have one record here with the key of my web part and web part properties as a separate column. Why this approach is good, at least from my point of view, if you are ISV, you can have single list in OneDrive, and you can store different configurations here for different web parts. So for example, if you're providing a bundle of like 10, I don't know, web parts, you will have 10 different options here with 10 different keys, and request information about properties from this list. You don't need to create separate file or a separate instance of library for each and every configuration and each and every web part. So let's look at the code. It should be good size. So there is not much interesting from the web part itself. The only thing that we are doing here, we can't get properties from this .properties object, and instead of that, we are creating the web part properties service that actually gets properties from OneDrive, and when needed, set properties to OneDrive as well, based on web part key, and web part properties are kind of custom properties object from our web part. And the interesting part is the service. So I have the interface for the web part properties service. So it basically means if you copy and paste the code from this web part to your solutions, you can implement some other approach using just this interface. It has just two methods, get properties and set properties. And I have the implementation for this interface, OneDrive list web part properties service. Under the hood, it is using Microsoft Graph to communicate with OneDrive. And the main things that are done here, first, we are getting my site graph ID. So this is done using /me/drive/root, and from there we are getting SharePoint IDs. It actually allows us to construct site ID that is used to work with SharePoint and OneDrive sites inside Microsoft Graph. The second request that we need is to get settings list ID. So we are trying to get our list from OneDrive. If it's not there, we will create the list first and then store this ID in our web part again, because we need that to store our settings. And two main methods or implementation of our interface is basically really simple as well. In our set properties, we are getting this list ID that we previously stored, or if it's not, we are creating the list. We are updating the internal cache because we don't want to do all the requests all the time. When one property, for example, changed, we have our instance of the service, so it will be just populated from our memory, right? So then we are checking if there is existing item for our web part properties. If yes, in that case, we will just update the specific field with our new properties. Otherwise, we will create a new row in our list, new item in our list, and provide properties in there. So as I said, this approach allows you to have multiple web parts all in the same list with different configurations, and it will automatically create additional list items for you if it's not there. So that's probably it. It's a pretty simple code, and go to AKMS SPFx web parts, I believe, and the example is there, and copy and paste the code if you need, and feel free to use it in your custom solutions.
Now, Alex, let's talk about a few of the implementation styles. So can you go back on your SharePoint, your OneDrive site? Not on the code, but the site, and just kind of explaining this model. And obviously, if you would go to your view lists view on the site, anybody would not be able to see the list, which is good.
Yes,
so it's a kind of a hidden list. So you're creating a list which is hidden, and you only get access on it if you know the URL. And so that's actually smart way, and the kind of a classic way how we are storing data in the SharePoint in general. So hidden lists, there's actually a lot of hidden lists in the sites where we're storing the information. But just out of curiosity, can you actually go to your app catalog? Don't go away from this tab. We'll get back in here. And then I will actually give you the URL on the chat in your app catalog site. If you go /lists/component manifests. just getting some insights on how we as a Microsoft and engineering, we're actually taking advantage of this exactly the same model. So when I think about it, whatever Alex showed as the storage option, and creating a list behind the scenes, the user has always permissions creating his own list and then saving the information to the list in the OneDrive is exactly the same what we do a lot in SharePoint as well. So even your individual SharePoint framework components, these are the ones. These are actually the ones which we're operating behind the scenes. Obviously, it is not intended for anybody to go here and edit the settings and all of that because it actually breaks stuff. But if needed, this is good information from a troubleshooting perspective because you might need to have to go here and then see if something is there. Now, if you go back on your own list implementation, Alex, again, one of the things here super important to notice is that you want to name the list using some sort of a unique naming convention within your company. So that, because it would be pretty awkward, Alex, if your company would be using exactly the same named list than some other ISV.
Of course.
Then that might actually cause conflict. So there's kind of an interesting implications in here. So, Alex, so there's a few questions related on. So first of all, I might actually confuse people on the client-side components list. That was only to show that we're using that kind of a model and an approach and a pattern internally and out of the box. You cannot actually save information in there. It was mainly to show the model that whatever Alex shows, we use it internally as well. Then there was a good comment from Arun. Is it not better to use Microsoft Graph Open extensions or schema extensions for specific user to store this information?
Yeah, so basically it was one of the approaches I mentioned in the beginning of the demo, that you can use custom properties or schema extensions for users and store the information there. It's just one of the approaches. Yes. Yeah.
And then what's the better approach? What's the bad approach? It's always debatable. There's advantages and disadvantages on different options. So whatever actually feels more comfortable for the developer, that would be the chosen.
Yes.
Cool. I think we went through all of the questions in the chat pretty much, and just wanted to kind of reiterate what we were showing so that people understand the power. Can you go back still on the web part or the personal application? Just making sure that people do understand that this is a weird thing, but it's actually by design in Microsoft Teams that there is no setting option for personal applications. So personal applications are not intended to have a native out-of-the-box configuration option. And that's what we're basically, it is. I do agree on that. But apparently from their perspective, they decided that that's not apparently needed. So I don't know. But I think that's it for now. So thank you, Alex.
One remark, because there is no out-of-the-box settings in Teams, it means that you will need to implement these property settings by yourself, this panel, because you will never see a property pane provided by SharePoint Framework.
Good point. Yes, absolutely. Now, it might be that in the future editions and versions of SharePoint Framework, like SharePoint Framework version 1.12 or 13 or 14, who knows if we skip 13, because there was no SharePoint version 13 either. Anyway, that's sidetrack. But in those, there might be some native support for something, maybe. If people find these kind of things useful. But again, like Alex showed, implementing this as a own extensibility or own implementation is not a massive deal. Good. Let's actually move into the Siddharth's side and Siddharth's demo. And this was around adding JavaScript and CSS to modern pages, which I think we will have a discussion on, is this actually recommended or a good approach or a bad approach as well. But let's actually go through the implementation first and then talk about what it actually means. And take it away.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So myself, Siddharth. I'm a technical consultant working primarily focusing on SharePoint, Office 365 and Azure. Today, I will be presenting an SPFx solution, which will allow us to add JavaScript and CSS reference onto the modern pages. This is the link to the sample, which is available in our SPFx web parts repo. So driving factor, one of the main driving factor was, how we can make SPFx extension configurable, right? So as we know, with modern pages, we are not allowed to edit the master page. So if we wanted to add any JavaScript or CSS file references, we have to use SPFx extension of the type application customizer through which we can inject JS and CSS file reference. And as Vesa mentioned, again, this is a debatable topic whether we should be doing it or not. That is a different story. But for now, the primary focus is, in case wherein if the organization or the customer which you are working on had very strict branding guidelines, and we might have to use custom CSS customization on all the modern web part pages, then there might not be other way rather than using the customization using CSS files. So another driving factor is if we are using the SPFx extension of application customizers, the references which we wanted to add, which we need to add it in the code itself. So it would be kind of hard coded in the solution. And if we wanted to remove or add existing reference, then we might have to change the extension code again, redeploy the package. And also, if suppose we think we can also make it, it won't be reusable. If suppose if you have two different site collection wherein we need two different references, different set of references, JavaScript and CSS references for each site collection, then we might have to build two different SPFx solution, one for site collection 1 and one for site collection 2. But in this, the solution which I would be presenting, it's kind of a reusable solution wherein we can use a single solution across your tenant, and it can be used across different site collections, and different JS and CSS file reference can be added onto the modern pages. So this solution demonstrates the usage of web part and extension. Now we are connecting the web part and extension. This is interesting. I mean, via custom actions. So, okay, we are using custom actions to activate and deactivate an SPFx extension. As I said, it will allow us to add the custom JS and CSS file reference. It will also allow to add or remove the reference. It supports a relative URL and a simple security reason. I mean, we don't want any user who has access to the site to allow or use this web part. For that reason, simple reason, I have added a simple permission security wherein the users with managed permission will be only able to do the operations. Okay. So coming to the demo. So this is the web part page, and this is the web part. Which would allow us to add the custom and JS file references. See, on the page load, it will check whether there are any existing JS or CSS file reference which have been added via this solution. If so, it would be loaded. Otherwise, it will allow me to add new. It will also allow me to add new JS and CSS reference. For the demonstration purpose, and as simple as I can make, what I did is I created a custom JavaScript file where just I'm alerting simple alert box in the JavaScript file, and in the custom CSS file, I'm just changing the background of the left navigation. And again, a warning here, I mean, we should not be using this kind of customization, which is heavily dependent on the page structure, because, in future, if Microsoft change something onto the page structure, our customization can break. But this might not be a solution. But if you think about it, if we wanted to add any external JS or CSS reference, which you wanted to use across multiple SPFx web part, and you wanted to add references onto all the modern pages, still this kind of adding references by application customization can be used. Okay. Now, so coming to the demo, if what I can do is I can just add JavaScript, add JS link button. I'll just copy the reference to the JS file. I'll say add here, and I will also add a reference to my custom CSS file. Once I have done this, I'll just activate it, and it will activate the application customizer. And if now I'll refresh the page, the JavaScript file and the CSS file customization which I have done would be activated. So if you see, I can see the alert box which was there in the custom JS file, and the color of my left navigation has changed, right? And as I said, if the web part already has some customization been done, it also allows to edit the reference. It also allowed us to add new references, or it also allows us to delete the references. So now for now, I'm just deleting the JavaScript reference. And if I say activate, it would automatically update the application customization. And now once I refresh the page, I won't see the alert box because I have removed reference to the JavaScript file, but the CSS customization would be there. So one more feature here is we can altogether deactivate everything rather than doing individual. If you wanted to deactivate, I can just say deactivate, and everything would be deactivated. And I should not be see any references would be removed, and the customization also would be removed. Okay, so this is the demonstration of the web part. Going to the code, as I said, we have two components. One is SPFx extension, which takes care of injecting the scripts, JavaScript references and CSS file references. I'll come back to this later. And in the web part, we have the extension which will have the user interface. So I'm using PnP mix of PnP controls and Office UI or Fluent UI controls to create the user interface. And on the page load, the first method which would be called is to check the permissions. Okay, so here again we are using PnP.js to check whether the current logged in user has managed web permission. If so, he would be able to allow to move forward. Otherwise, we would be displaying a simple access denied error message onto the web part, and he won't be able to use that particular web part. Coming to the page load method, on the page load, we are checking whether we are first reading the current custom actions which are registered onto this particular site collection. And then we are filtering based on the custom action title. So this is kind of a custom action title which is kind of hard coded, so that I can compare it, and I can also read. I can also add it whenever it is required. So based on the title, it will check whether the custom action has been registered already. If so, it will basically read the client-side component property. So this is the interesting part. Okay, how we can make an SPFx extension customizable. So associating the client-side component properties attribute of a custom action would allow us to pass dynamic properties to the extension also. And this we would be passing while we would be registering the custom actions. So once we get the properties, we are passing that particular JSON and categorizing into JS file references and CSS file references. And then we are setting state so that it would be displayed on the page load. Right now, coming to when the user clicks on activate button. So this is the method which would be calling. And here if we see, this is the payload through which the extension and the custom action is getting connected. Okay, now the title, as I said, it is something which I have hard coded in the code itself so that I can compare it later when the page load is happening. The location of the custom action should be of type application customizer, and the client-side component ID is the application customizer component ID, which we can found in the extensions manifest.json file. So this is how the parts, the custom action is connected to the extension. And I'm setting the client-side component properties which the user would have selected. And then we are checking whether there is a current custom action which has been already registered. If there is no custom action which has been registered, then we are adding a new user custom actions. And then if there is a custom action which is already registered via this solution, it will basically update. So PnP.js library has been used to perform the custom action operations here. So this is how the extension code is being connected with the web part, and make it can be made configurable so that we can allow user to pass some properties to our SPFx extension via web part, and the extension will do its work as soon as the extension would be loaded. So that's it from the code side. Before moving on, I just wanted to add one interesting read here, which was helpful for me, which is available at this Microsoft Docs link. From this particular paragraph, I got an idea wherein, though it says that we can associate a client-side component ID with the field customizer in the documentation part, and we can associate the properties also. But this is from where I got the idea that we might be able to use it in the other extension types also. So that's it from my side. Thank you everyone for listening. Over to you, Vesa.
Thank you, Siddharth. Let's now close to the discussion yet because we still have a few minutes.
Sure.
Can we go to the code? And just to pinpoint there, the sp.web. The user custom action. And that's where we add or get, we operate the user custom action there exactly. So this one, just for those who are not super familiar with this one, this is an object model and structure which have existed in SharePoint since 2010. It is 2020 now, so it's kind of interesting. But it's being kind of a classic way of embedding scripts or references to scripts on a pages, and basically Siddharth's solution is taking advantage of exactly the same classic option, where we are then adding it gives you the capabilities of adding a script URL or an actual script, and then it will be executed as part of the page. You could actually set this also in the site collection level, but typically in a modern SharePoint experiences, one site is a one site collection. So because we're heading to this direction where we talk about hub sites and rather than sub sites. So therefore, quite often adding this to the web object would be enough. Unless I'm completely wrong, if you would do sp.site.user custom action, that would be available there as well. And the implementation would be exactly the same. Is there a sp.site? Yeah. And user custom action should be there as well.
Yeah, it is there.
Yeah, so this one, if you'd add the script or a setting in here, it would actually impact all of the sites within the site collection. And like I said, this is quite classic script embedding scenario, which we've been using in SharePoint for addressing gaps in the product for quite a few years already. Well, almost more than a decade already, which is kind of scary as well. And just to recap, which we mentioned, so you should only use this in the scenarios where customer says that you need to do this or you will lose the deal or whatever. So it's not, because the problem is really here is that your code is not in the native extensibility point, and that might mean that your code will not execute in all of the scenarios. Well, we'll execute the user custom action, but for example, if you get a dependency on the CSS IDs or elements in a page, which will be changed at some point, which is the typical way of hiding stuff or modifying stuff. Like in this case, thank you, Siddharth, you basically have the SP left navigation. We do not guarantee that the DOM structure, so basically the structure of the page, is an API. It's never intended to be an API. It should not considered as an API. So therefore, the DOM structure, the structure of the page, including the CSS style names, might actually be changed without us letting you know about that, because we don't guarantee that as an extensibility point. Again, you can do that, but there's this dependency on things. And then obviously we were looking into having more aligned and in quotes railed experiences of doing exactly what is being done here in a more safer ways. And those are the extensions and how the things which we can do with the SharePoint framework. Anyway, thank you, Siddharth. Thank you, Siddharth, for walking through what I was actually saying. So awesome job on that. But I think that's it. Paul, you are next in the line.
Hello. I wanted to cover a couple of tips I've done using with SPFx over the last couple of months or so, using Visual Studio Codespaces, or I guess you could say GitHub has them as well as React hooks. So a little bit about me. I work at N365. I co-host a podcast. If you don't hear enough of my voice today, you can certainly find out more. I will say that we recorded the interview with the PM of Codespaces earlier this week, so that'll be published in the next couple of weeks. So if you want to learn more, you can certainly get it from there. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm on the Twitter and or email. Happy to follow up on any questions that you guys might have as well. So real quick, I want to show a little bit about Codespaces. I confirmed it's one word with one capital letter. So Codespaces is currently in public preview, which lets you connect to a cloud-hosted development environment using the browser or VS Code or Visual Studio. And there's the link in there. We can get these links posted up as well. They're pretty straightforward. But the idea, of course, around this is that Microsoft will then host, or GitHub, right, will host a development container, and you can connect to it using your various tools. So I want to switch first over to the web page, and here's Visual Studio Codespaces. Now I've connected using my Microsoft account that has an Azure subscription. You have to connect to an Azure subscription, and so I've done that. You can see I have no Codespaces. So I'm going to create a blank one now, so we'll call this Demo 1 for the moment. And the idea around this is that you would you can connect to a Git repository. I'm going to leave it blank for now just to show you what you get when you launch this. And so I'm in the browser. It's going to go through and do all this work, and then we'll eventually load Visual Studio in the browser. So you can see here, it's online.visualstudio.com is coming up. It's telling me it's preparing my environment, and off it goes. Well, so that's kind of interesting, but at the end of the day, I want to be able to do something, right? And so the first impression might be, this is like a VM, so I can then do Yo Team or Yo Microsoft/SharePoint if I want. However, the idea around this really is that perhaps you have a GitHub repo already, or a Azure DevOps repo that you would then connect to, and then you can work on that code. So that's kind of the scenario that I would typically do. So next I'm going to switch over to Visual Studio Code, and I have an empty window in Visual Studio Code here, and I've installed the extension called Remote Explorer, and this connects again to the same Codespaces. Let me just do a quick refresh here. And so I'm going to create a new Codespace. However, this time I'm going to connect to a repo that I already have. And this repo has just an out-of-the-box 1.10 SharePoint web part or SPFx web part already created to it. And so the idea here, of course, now is I would want to work on this web part, or perhaps I need to review a PR, or perhaps I just need to make a quick change, or even if I want to do my full development, I don't have it locally. So this will go through and do the same thing. Now, what if I go back to the browser one? You can see here it's done all its work. It's created. I can do the terminal. And if I look here and I do Node, you'll notice that what I get out of the box is that version 12 of Node.js, which is not what SharePoint is built on at the moment. However, Node Version Manager is installed on the VM, so I can do the information right to switch over to version 10. So now what I've done in this SPFx Codespaces repo, so let me switch over to that real quick. That would be here. I've created what they call a dev container folder. And in this dev container folder, I have a JSON file that describes the environment. And this is a couple of things that we'll cover these. But the first one I'll talk about is it's doing the SPFx setup. And so if I go back to this container and look at this script, what will happen is after my environment is created, it'll switch, it'll launch Node Version Manager, install version 10. And since I've reinstalled Node for all practical purposes, I'm going to need gulp. So it'll do an npm install gulp globally under Node version 10, and then it'll run npm install against the project in the current directory. And if I look in here, you'll see here that it's done the work, it's gone through. Part of what Codespaces does is it will do a clone. So if I look here, so you can see it's done a git clone of the repo that I provided to it. And then further down here, now you won't see this because it scrolls, but if you look, what's happening here in the lines, you'll see that it has actually done downloading and installing Node version 10. And further down, it is actually doing the Node or the npm install for gulp. I'm going to then connect, and now you see the window refreshes, and now in my Codespaces list here on the side, it will show, once it's connected, it will show the project. Now it looks like it's building it again, but it's really not. It's just doing a different connection. But here we are. We now have our SPF project. If I open this up here, I can do my gulp build, right? So that should work. Everything is fine. If I go back to my dev container file, part of what I've done here is I've configured forwarding ports. These are the ports that are used for the local workbench. And if I go back to my extension here, you can see here those ports have been forwarded. Now I can do these manually. I can right click and create a new one, but the idea of using a dev container file is that I can have these pre-configured and let that work, right? So if I were to run this now, I'm going to get the problem because the developer certificate is not trusted. So there's a step I have to do here. First of all, I want to create the dev cert, and when I run this now in this remote environment, I'm running under Linux, and it tells you so. For Windows or Mac OS, it'll automatically trust that, but for Linux, it will not. So the file was created here in this folder, right? So I want to get that locally, because if I run the browser, I have to run the browser locally because I'm connected to a container that has just the Linux, shell running on it. So first of all, I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. Oops. My shortcut is a little off here. So it's /home. Yes, online. So now I've copied that folder from where the trust dev cert does, and here is the certificate files right here, right? And so I can right click on this and download. Visual Studio knows that I am connected remotely, so it'll let me do this. So I just put this in my research folder here real quick and give it a name. And if I switch over to that folder, and you'll see there it is here. Now, the next step is to actually install this locally on my machine. And so the command that would be run by the gulp task is the cert util on Windows. Oops, I forgot to do this. And so now I get my typical, you're about to install the certificate. Yes. Now that I've done that, I can view this in the workbench. So to do that, gulp serve. If I put these in my notepad so I can paste them here. Well, that'll run, and gulp serve then of course will run, start the workbench for me. And so let me open the browser real quick. Now I haven't seen that the redirects don't normally work so great, so I just put in the workbench URL, and now you see, boom, there we are with the workbench, and we have our wonderful hello world web part, life is good. So these steps are summarized on my blog. I'll post that link in the when we're done. But that's the idea around Codespaces, is that I can connect quickly, get a SharePoint framework or any environment running. Now, right now it's only Linux, and Windows is on the way. And again, Visual Studio, full Visual Studio for the 6 or 8 of us who still use it, is in private preview, but that's available as well. So that is it. Now, the next part of my talk was to talk about React hooks. And so I'm going to switch over now to a couple of different Visual Studio Code windows. The first one is this adaptive. This is in the samples repo. This is the adaptive card web part that Hugo has built and demoed a couple times. I look back in the history to see his demo of this, and I want to compare and contrast that with the hooks version. And so a couple things that I want to call out. First of all, is that hooks are optional. You can run those side by side. They run on function components, but they work well with class components. And so what I did is just to go through his web part here, and I've changed it around. So let me bring this one up here. I'm trying to race through this. Obviously, I'm not gonna cover the whole thing, right? So we have the 2 different versions here. Well, I'm not going to do them side by side. That's not going to work with me today. But what I want to point out here, we look real close in here. What I've done is the actual web part that is generated is untouched, basically, right? The SharePoint framework creates a class, and that's fine. Hooks are not supported in classes. But if you think through what needs to happen here in general, we just I just use the built-in web part to host a functional component, right, which is this root component. And then, of course, all the work to be done for properties is still as it always was. So that part still works. So I look real close at the root component. This is a functional component here, so React functional component. So it can use hooks, right? And there's a couple of custom hooks that I've used. One of them is a card service, which will make a call out to an HTTP endpoint. Use the list data service, so that's basically using the SP.js to read a list. And then there's a couple of built-in ones here to set state. So things that you would expect, I'm going to be setting state for stuff I need to do. And then you can see here we're using the use effect hook to react when something changes. So again, you can read more about this in links that we'll post, but when I have this dependency of null, that means it's kind of a component did mount. So when it did mount, it'll go through. And what I want to point out here is that it's going to connect to the context, right? So this is the SharePoint context that we give as part of our web part. If I go back to my top one here, you'll notice that's when I do render, it is passing this .context into the root component. Right? And so it's available there. I can then pull information out of that. Right? Now, another thing that what this root component is doing is it's importing a app context. Right? And the idea around this is I can now use an app context when I render, and I can provide things that are put on the context are now available to all children, and which basically is everything in my web part. Why do I care about this? Because I can now reference things from the context instead of having to pass it down. So the reason this becomes interesting to me is because as I drill down into other components, I don't necessarily need to have the passed in as a property, right? There's no properties that are passed in. I just use the context. So this makes sense. I'm just one child down, but if I keep going further down into my adaptive card host, we come into the adaptive card host control. Again, I'm going to then get the context, and I don't have to pass in any properties. The properties that I'm passing in are really only things that are going to be directly control the rendering. What I need the context for is because I want to switch when the theme changes, right? So if the SharePoint web part, the SharePoint site theme changes, I may want to react to that, or I want to make an HTTP call in response to a handler on the adaptive card. I don't necessarily have to pass in a property that's not necessarily used. So this is the kind of the idea around using context and using hooks. I want to go back to my viewer web part. There's a bunch of other hooks in here. Scroll down. I know I'm going very fast here. Sorry about that. Not this one. If I go back to the adaptive card viewer, I got myself all confused here. If I go back to adaptive card host component, yeah, all right. So you'll notice here it's reacting to, is the data loading? I'm going to show a spinner, or I'm going to show the adaptive card. If I look at the adaptive card, what's interesting here, I think, is that if looking at this closely, this is a class component. In fact, it's unchanged from what Hugo had prepared. The key point here is I can use hooks and functional components alongside class components. I don't have to change everything. So I was able to leave the top level part, the original SPFx generated web part, as a class, and the bottom, if you will, the bottom of the tree, the rendering component, is still a class, and everything in between is set up to be hooks. And so if you look at both projects, you'll see there's a lot of services in here, and this is, I've abstracted out a bunch of the stuff to do HTTP context in here. And there's also a reducer. You can read more about the use reducer hook as well. The reducer becomes helpful because as I make change, or as the information comes back from the HTTP, if I get my data from HTTP endpoint, this will be reflected in the state. And so when this hook will monitor the state, and when the state changes, it'll cause a re-render. So in this particular example, you can see where I'm just saying, hey, here's my data that came in as a payload, right? When my type is complete, here's the data. I can pass the data in here by using this dispatch method in the reducer, and this will cause a re-render, so the web part will re-render. So, and you can see there's various hooks on different dependent properties, and that I find this becomes much cleaner to have individual methods based on changes instead of a big monolithic data rendering one. So if I go back to the old one, you'll notice if I come into the adaptive card host component in here, there's a lot of if statements going through and checking through what's going on. So it's just a way to get us a little bit more straightforward code in using the hooks along with the context. So talking about hooks, just to recap, there's some reasons why the React team built them. The bottom one there is what helps me confuse this. What is this in a particular class? So that doesn't matter because it's a function. And all I've done is refactor to use context and state. And here are a bunch of links. Again, I'll post these in the chat, and I'm happy to take any questions that folks have.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. The one thing we went through completely two different topics in a really fast time frame, but on the Codespaces, do you see that that's a viable option, an alternative for development environment?
I do. Where I can see this being helpful is number one, as an open source contributor, perhaps I want to just do something quick to review a PR. In fact, I found I wanted to add a feature to Stefan Bauer's Panthema web part. So I was able to just fork the repo, create the code space, do that, boom, off I go. It's great. Another idea, if I have this dev container in the repo, so it's building up a dev team. So working with a dev team here at the office, how much setup do you do on your computer to make it ready to go? Now I don't have to necessarily do that. I can say, here, point to this, you can be productive on day one. If you want to run locally, you can review what the code space is doing and go from there. So yeah, it certainly is going to be helpful, I believe.
Yep, yeah, and I think that definitely the main power there. No, you don't have to install anything to your own actual computer to make stuff happen. So that's really, really cool. Absolutely. Now, let me actually go back on slides where we're running out of time as well. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to close up the call. But thank you, Alex. Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you, Paul, for the great demos. We actually had 4 demos, so not just 3. So
yeah, I kind of pushed my way into doing more. You're welcome.
Yes. No, all good. All good. Anyway, so the recording of the setup will be available tomorrow in 24 hours in the Microsoft 365 SharePoint community YouTube channel at AKMS M365 PnP videos. Now, M365 Dev and M365 PnP are the ones where we communicate different stuff. Next SPFx community call is on July 2nd at 7 a.m. Pacific time. Next M365 generic call is on June 25th, week from now. And the July monthly community call for SharePoint is on July 14th. There's a lot of calls, and that doesn't actually end there because there's a lot of other calls as well. So yes, we have produced a lot of material which you can join. Again, you don't have to join on all of these calls. Everything is getting recorded, and then you can go back on YouTube and watch the demos and videos and all of that stuff based on your interest. In general, also, if you have feedback around our setup, what kind of things we should be covering more, what kind of less, please provide us feedback. All of these calls are there for your benefit, not for ours. Now, we do not have a time for Q&A, and we're hitting the hour. So thank you, everybody. Thank you once again for the presenters, and thank you for the people who joined the call. Have a great weekend, and we'll be definitely back in business after at least, well, I'm heading on a long weekend today, but you might be working tomorrow, but we'll be back in business latest on Monday. Cheers. Bye-bye.